This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
All right then. It's a rare Monday morning where I actually get to sit down to record. How about that? Since we barely had anything worth discussing with the Superstation program, I might just kill two birds with one stone and knock out the Midsouth review back to back. Give myself even more of a break this week. Hope everyone's doing well. You are currently tuned into the Five Starr Wrestling Report podcast. This is our Friday edition, despite me just mentioning the fact that I'm recording this portion of the show on Monday. If y'all thought the shows were live, nah, sorry to break the illusion. I've thought about doing live streams a couple times. That would probably involve me having to use a webcam. Plus the audio would be even crappier than the audio you currently get with my existing mic. It's the biggest running gag on this channel for the last 4 years. Do I want to purchase a decent microphone? Absolutely. Will I ever get around to it? Probably not. Not because I can't afford one, I'm just lazy. But you do know our motto. We are the wrestling channel nobody knows but everyone needs. I think I already mentioned this on the Friday episode when I pre-recorded the Raw review, but yeah, happy Labor Day. All you blue-collar, hard-working Americans out there. Here's your government-funded holiday break for the year. I guess everyone sort of benefits from that, including the kids. Because, most schools I know don't do classes on Labor Day. Maybe private schools do, I don't know. So in essence, how much of a break are you really getting? The one day a year we're supposed to celebrate having a day off as adults. And all the poor saps with kids that end up becoming glorified babysitters. I'm just teasing. Families are a great thing. I'm all for celebrating the nuclear family when it's actually worth celebrating. Anyway, I said the WCW program didn't have a whole lot going on this week, so why don't we go ahead and get that out of the way and move into the Mid-South review right afterward. So on this week's edition of Why Even Bother WCW on the Superstation, we begin the show with a graphic that reads, "We now join the following program in progress." In progress, you say. Well, that probably accounted for why the show was only 30 minutes this week. I would have assumed it was because of the holiday, but who even knows anymore? Trying to figure out WCW programming in 1989 was like trying to solve a jigsaw puzzle. Like, one week they've got a show tape that's only 45 minutes. Then the next week it's 2 hours. Then there's just a random week where they don't air an episode due to preemption or somebody screwed up in the taping schedule. That actually happened recently. It was one of the shows we reviewed in August. I guess they aired the wrong show. I don't even remember the whole backstory, but they really screwed up. Personally, I would still like to know the backstory as to why they stopped uploading the Saturday night TBS shows on Peacock. I mean, it's not even like it happened at the beginning of the Crockett turnover, or say after they left for center stage. It was like a random week in mid-July, right in the middle of bash season. You know what, though? I probably shouldn't be complaining. After sitting here the last 2 weeks and griping about these TBS shows needlessly going 2 hours, I'll take the 30-minute episode. At least I wasn't mentally fatigued by the end. Yelling for Courtney to give me my gun from the safe so I can put myself out of my misery. So as we go into our in-progress episode this week, the cold open is a Tommy Rich Agent Steel squash. And approximately 10 minutes into the program this week, I was already over it. Dude. At this stage, I think it's a toss-up between Tommy Rich and Brad Armstrong in the case of who can put me to sleep faster having to watch them work TV squashes. Oh my God. 5 fucking minutes. That is how long I had to watch Tommy work over Agent Steel in a stationary arm wringer. Not even as a transition spot. He literally spent 4 minutes and 55 seconds of this 5-minute snooze fest holding Steel in a standing armbar. And the last 5 seconds was him doing the Thez press and getting the pin. I think it's a direct rib on me. They are determined to try to put me into a coma watching this program. Seriously, who in the fuck thought this was a good idea to air at the top of the show? God bless Tommy Rich, I have nothing against him. But his matches are so dry, you have to watch him in the rain just to get anything out of them. Holy Christ. Yet somehow this is supposed to get me to want to see him chase Luger for the US heavyweight title. And the ironic thing of it all, leave it to Tommy fucking Rich to then cut a pre-tape promo after the match where the entire subject was on the basis of boredom. I'm not kidding you, that is what he talked about in his 30-second promo. Because remember, the whole premise is that Luger's bored and unmotivated because he feels he lacks suitable competition for his title because he's better than everybody else. Man, when I heard Tommy Rich utter the word boredom, I was like, bro, you go back and watch one of your recent matches on replay in the last few weeks. I think we found the cure to insomnia right there. I don't even know what else he talked about. It was just a rambling promo where he talked in circles for a while. And yeah, he was definitely passionate with his delivery. You know who else was passionate with promo delivery? Paul Jones. Didn't mean you ever knew what the hell he was talking about half the time. Most of the time, he didn't even know what the hell he was talking about. So then we briefly came back to hear a Ric Flair Sting promo. And they were here to talk not about the upcoming Clash event in a couple weeks, but they actually promoted a couple big rematches for the Omni tomorrow night. One of which was Sting and Muta for the TV title. By the way, Sting still does not have possession of that belt, and I'm pretty sure he's still technically the champion. He does not seem concerned by it. His belt was stolen from him. Muta's held this thing hostage for well over a month. Sting does not care. Amazing. They're also doing Flair versus Funk for the title in a Texas death match, which actually sounds pretty damn wild. I'd love to see some of that footage aired on the Superstation. Probably couldn't get away with it because they'd be bleeding buckets. You know, Flair talked about the fact that he doesn't wear cowboy hats or boots. But when he goes to Texas, all the girls still call him Cowboy. Giving a whole new meaning to Ride 'em Cowboy, if you know what I mean. So then, as God is my witness, I'm not kidding you. Keeping with the theme of these people intentionally trying to rib me at every turn. I think at this point they were just begging for me to turn the show off in disgust. It's one thing to start with a cold Tommy Rich squash that nearly puts me to sleep. But to then follow that with a Dan Spivey singles match. The fucking balls on these people. You know what? I'm actually going to pass it off to you and let you be the judge. Dan Spivey versus Rusty Riddle. Did it suck? Was it a miserable viewing experience? Think about the parties involved. You put two and two together. Oh yeah, I also forgot to mention this. Guess who was on color with JR? A name you probably haven't thought about in a while. Frankly, I was surprised when I found out he came back. Wahoo McDaniel. Yeah, apparently he came back as an agent or a producer sometime in '89. I think that might have been Flair's call since he was part of the booking committee by this point. I don't remember if Wahoo ever had a hand in being a part of the actual booking team. But, you know, considering the relationship between him and Flair, probably shouldn't come as a surprise that he came back. I mean, he was primarily responsible for helping to put Flair on the map in Mid-Atlantic back in '74. Anyway, I thought it was a cool little factoid. After that Dan Spivey debacle, we had a Road Warriors promo where they talked about the Samoans and Paul E., where Ellering was using quite derogatory slander, such as insignificant specks of slime. Yeah, Ellering was really reaching into the depths of profanity to come up with that. This whole thing was so wacky. I'm not actually joking. This is like a prototypical early 90s WWF Road Warriors promo. Like, this would have fit right in with Ellering, Hawk, and Animal doing promos about Rocco, the ventriloquist dummy. Or Paul going out on television responding to Bobby Heenan, calling them the Legion of Dummies. Just absolute cornball child play dialogue. And naturally, it's what killed the mystique of the Road Warriors in the WWF. Not that they already hadn't been ruined by the Jim Herd regime a year prior. So then we had Bill Ford and Trent Knight versus the SST. It went 20 seconds and the Samoans won with the assisted splash. Literally nothing else to say about it. But that brought us to the highlight of the show. And no, I'm not just saying that because we got to see Nancy. Although she helped in making that case. I actually don't remember. Is this the first time we've actually heard Nancy do a promo? I know I keep calling her by her real name. Sorry. I'll try to start referring to her as Robin before she becomes woman in about a month. Anyway, so, she did the promo thanking Rick, Scott, and Missy for allowing her to be a part of their group. She was quite feminine and very sweet. Perhaps a little too sweet. And then, Scotty started talking about the Omni. Said that it was like a second home for him and his brother Rick. To which Rick then interrupted by saying, "I already got a home. What are you talking about?" And JR just calmly pulls the mic away from Scott and goes, "Rick, it's a figure of speech." And then we get the actual best part of the promo. Scotty's just going on and on and on about God knows what. And you can tell he has no clear-cut idea of what he wants to say or where he's trying to go. He's talking about how he and his brother are going to keep knocking down everybody they line up to face them. They'll be suplexed, dropped, beaten, etc. It's time for all the big tough guys in WCW to show how big and tough they are. He's just getting more and more lost the longer it goes. Finally, he just stops mid-thought and goes, "Tell him, dogface." And then for like a split moment, they keep the camera on Scotty long enough to show his facial reaction. He just looks down at the ground and does the big sigh of relief like, thank fucking God that's over with. Oh God, poor Scotty. Promos were not his thing when he first broke into the business. His kryptonite. Putting a live mic in front of him before 1998 was like leaving a toddler in the kitchen with a burning stovetop. I mean, you're just waiting for the inevitable disaster to happen. This was not a good promo for Scott. And he fucking knew how bad it was. Thankfully, Rick saved it by joking about the skyscraper's height. And this part was actually pretty good too. He goes, "How tall are they?" And JR goes, "About 7 feet." And Rick responds, "They aren't 7 feet. Who told you that?" And JR goes, "Well, Teddy Long, of course." To which Rick caps it off perfectly with, "That peanut head cue balls line, they aren't 7 feet." Oh my God. This is why we need unscripted promos in wrestling again. For train wreck TV moments like this. I mean, what can you say I mean, at this point, Rick Steiner's become the handsome Jimmy Valiant of WCW programming. He's the comedy relief. You know everything that comes out of his mouth is going to be nothing but mumbo-jumbo BS. But you still want to watch, laugh, and have a good time. You know, just as long as they don't keep the mic in front of Scotty for more than 60 seconds. I can always look forward to a Steiner's promo. We had some pre-taped comments from Michael Hayes before the next TV match. He basically just talked about how every tag team in the NWA is inferior to them. And specifically when it comes to the Steiners, they're about 6 years younger and 10 years less experienced than the Freebirds. For 10 years, the Freebirds have rewritten the history books and made people pay attention. And nobody's about to come along and steal their thunder. Up to and including some of these young hotshots in the tag division. And this is always one of those reminders. You know, every time I go back and hear Michael Hayes do a promo, whether it's live or pre-taped, guy was a hell of a talker. And a hell of a seller for the big money matches. It's just a damn shame that he and Jimmy Garvin were borderline intolerable to watch by the summer, even fall of '89. And it all goes back to every comment I've made about the way they carried themselves in the ring. Thinking that they were the second coming of Hawk and Animal. I mean, take their match with Tommy Angel and Louis Cecilia as a perfect example. It's not even the fact that Hayes and Garvin are out there working like they're the two biggest powerhouses on the entire roster. It's the fact that they absolutely refused to sell or register anything throughout the match defensively. To the point where you're just calling them out for their unprofessionalism. Like, you can still be cocky heels without needlessly making your opponents look like shit as a result. And you know what? I'm not even going to solely put the blame on Garvin in this situation because he at least took a body slam from Tommy Angel in the first 2 minutes of the match. Fucking Michael Hayes, dude. I don't know what this guy was on, but he was just out of control here. I mean, we always talk about Hayes not being the best in-ring worker. Of the three original Freebird teammates, Hayes was easily the weakest of the bunch. But of course, that's not what got him over in the first place. It was the promo and the personality that got Hayes over. We all know that. But you have to watch Hayes in this match to understand what I'm talking about. It's like he outright said to himself, unless somebody on this roster is a big name, I ain't selling shit. It's absurd. And people wonder why Dr. Death snapped on him over the Great American Bash tour. Started going after them with chairs and blooding them up in front of everybody in the locker room. I'd have probably done the same thing. Anyway, Garvin eventually went over with a DDT. And that was more or less the show. Actually, no, not more or less. That was the entire show this week. A 30-minute episode of nothing but squash matches and uninspiring pre-tape promos. Which is really a euphemism for so much of WCW in the year 1989. To be honest with you, I'm not even entirely sure what the point of reviewing it was. Looking back, we could have completely ignored this episode and nothing would have been neglected in the grand scheme of things. Now, we still got 2 more weeks before the Clash event in Columbia, South Carolina. The inaugural Fall Brawl before it later became its own standalone pay-per-view event. I mean, right now, the only thing that anybody really cares about on that card is Flair, Sting versus Funk and Muta, which, as we'll come to learn in the next couple weeks, winds up becoming Flair and Sting against Slater and Muta. But that's the big money match. Elsewise, you have a World Tag Team title feud with the Steiners and the Freebirds that reeks of an incoming heel swerve with Robin Green. I mean, that is being so plainly telegraphed. Fucking Stevie Wonder can see that shit coming a mile away. You got the Lex Luger Tommy Rich U.S. title feud, which is basically one of those Challenger of the Month ordeals just to give Luger somebody to work with. I mean, what else am I forgetting? Pillman and Norman? Yeah, there's a dynamite matchup everybody's rubbing their hands in anticipation for. I don't even know how much they're going to air the show in the next couple weeks. I mean, if it's a full 7 or 8 match card, it's likely there will be several things that are cut from the actual TV taping. Especially if it's 2 hours. But we'll see. We will see. For now, though, let's turn the table over and talk about this episode of Midsouth, because there's quite a bit to say about this particular episode.
Jeff McKay, a really genuine, nice guy with wonderful parents and family in Tulsa, Oklahoma. You know, Jeff, for a rising Hollywood star, is probably one of the most personable and genuine, friendly people that I've ever met. And then you saw JYD at Happier Times with Hacksaw Duggan, and I wanted to comment 1 minute on the Junkyard Dog, because I watched him come to Mid-South as a youngster, and his first time was failure. Then he came back and became one of the biggest stars ever in the Mid-South area. And a lot of people watched him grow. They supported him and watched his development to become truly a superstar. But then JYD walked out, not only on Mid-South, which really hurt me personally because I considered him a great friend. He walked out on all the fans in the Mid-South area with no notice after agreeing to certain key main events all through the Mid-South area and interviewing about it. And I know I was at the Superdome and talked to one of the fans, and they said, the only thing that really chaps me off is I've supported him and been behind him all the way, then he lied to us twice on television and didn't make the appearance that he's scheduled to appear in, didn't make any explanation. So apparently he doesn't think much. He's outgrown the fans of Mid-South and doesn't think that they're worthy of him even making a statement as to why he left. And I think this is the sad thing, and I think this is what the fans feel, because oftentimes in athletics today, the athletes get bigger than the sport that made them. Without any further comment, let's go to the ring and Jim Ross for our first bout.
Oh shit. That got dark in a hurry. Sorry for the terrible audio quality, by the way. I did my best. You know, that clip, this was, I think this was one of those moments where you look back through history and start to kind of poke holes in how the landscape of the territories were changing in the mid-'80s. Because there's so much to be said about that clip. I don't really want to get too long-winded or bogged down with the whole JYD conversation again. Whether or not you agree with what Watts did here, whether you think this kind of dirty laundry should have been aired to the public, it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that two things can be true at once. There's a valid argument to be made that what the dog did was very unprofessional. The fact that he left Mid-South without notice and directly insulted the fans, or as Watts noted here, outgrew them. And I even said here not that long ago, I personally don't agree with how JYD left the territory. no-showing bookings and live appearances like that. Completely improper way to do business. Especially with a company and a boss that helped to put you on the map and make you the star that you became. By that same token, I mean, did Watts have to publicly state his grievances and bury JYD in the way he did? No, probably not. You know, the people that want to say this was bitter and resentful behavior, I'm not going to dispute that. I wouldn't have conducted myself the way Watts did here. Because what did he really gain by doing this, you know? We always think about it from the premise of, what is the wrestling business about? It's about selling tickets and drawing money. How did any of this help Midsouth at the gate? How many extra tickets did they sell by airing crap like this to the TV audience? In a way, it probably hurt business more than helping it. You know, I look back in moments like this, and despite all the great content we've reviewed throughout 1984, a lot of that gets overshadowed when I go back and see this particular moment. What I consider a black eye on the legacy of Mid-South Wrestling. Because I remember this moment like the back of my hand. The first time I ever saw Watts make those public comments about the dog, I mean, not only did I immediately realize that reputation was forever tarnished, but I just thought to myself, you know, how did any of this help the company move forward? I understand Dog leaving was a big deal. I understand that people felt betrayed. You know, forget about the money he was making by going to work for Vince. But to have the promoters stand there and mock and ridicule his #1 box office attraction, you know, lambasting him for a personal decision that he made to better a life for his family and kids, that shit's just petty, man. Truly petty. Normally I'm one to back up a lot of what the Cowboys said on TV, in and out of kayfabe. But not this. This is a major drawback for Mid-South as a promotion. And unfortunately, it's all I could really think about for the remaining 30 minutes of the program. Despite all the great stuff we got this week. Trying to move past all that, though. Let's talk about the opener of Bob Owens versus Johnny Mantell. Because that'll surely bring everybody out of the rut. Hey everyone, Johnny Mantell's in a featured squash this week. How exciting. Said nobody in the history of wrestling. I mean, how many times did I sit here during World Class reviews and complain about Johnny Mantell being forced down everybody's throat in prelim matches? And that was all because Ken Mantell was still the booker. Of course, his brother was going to get featured spots on most of the weekly shows. It's not to say Johnny wasn't a decent athlete or anything, but nobody was ever clamoring to see Mantell pushed as a star. He was a good hand. That's about it. He had a 60-second squash and one with a Russian leg sweep. That's all there is to say about it. Drier than a nun's twat. But then we came back for an iconic Mid-South moment. Now, the scheduled match is the Midnight Express taking on Art Cruz and Rick McCord. But the bigger takeaway here is the fact that Jim Cornette is out there with a lucha mask on. And if you're trying to discern, okay, why did JC have a mask on? Well, he sort of explained it here in a way that didn't completely humiliate himself. And that's precisely what Hacksaw Duggan did to him. So J.R. Snidely remarks, "The mask is a great addition to the attire." Then Corny blows it off immediately and changes the subject to talk about the PYTs getting fired from Midsouth for refusing to pay the $10,000 fine last week. Which, yeah, I forgot to mention that during Waz's soapbox rant earlier. Yeah, Norvell and Coco are gone from Midsouth. They refused to pay the fine for Coco using the chair on Hercules in the Midnights. So they're out of there. See ya. Pack the bags and don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. And Cornette also talked about how the mask he's wearing is a symbol of mourning. It's a symbol to describe how Midsouth continues to discriminate against him and refuse to uphold their end of the bargain. After the Midnights were responsible for running out teams like the Rock and Roll Express, the PYTs, the Bruise Brothers, among numerous other names. And next on the chopping block will be names like Hacksaw Duggan and the Fantastics. Which brings Cornette to Krusher Kruschev. I love this quote, by the way. I wrote it down verbatim because it was so perfectly delivered. "I've offered Mr. Kruschev a huge sum of my mother's money for the hair of Hacksaw Duggan." Right. Not offering Kruschev his own money. It's his mother's money. Because, well, he's a mama's boy, you see. Fucking brilliant. I mean, this one promo almost made up for that Bill Watts tangent that nearly dragged the entire show down. So way to go, Corny. You single-handedly saved the show. But we did eventually get Bobby and Dennis versus Cruz and McCord. Oh yeah, I just realized I never actually explained why Cornette was wearing the mask, did I? Yeah, Duggan shaved his head. Cornette is officially bald as a cue ball. So he's wearing the mask to protect his face from being revealed. Kind of like how Buddy Roberts wore the fake wig under the wrestling helmet to hide his bald head. Only this was guaranteed to actually stay on. So the Midnights made quick work of the two. Ended up pinning McCord with a double goozle. I did make a comment here noting that this is the closest we've come to seeing Bobby and Dennis actually wearing matching gear for a change. Meaning that they at least both had red on. From there, we had an absolutely tremendous TV debut. They've been building this one up for a while, and my God, what an impression. The ultimate heat magnet in the Deep South here in 1984. It is the in-ring debut of one exotic Adrian Street. And he was quite the standout here at the Irish McNeil Boys Club. Accompanied by his manager, Miss Linda. This was something. If you have never seen Adrian Street, let me just say, You've got a lot of catching up to do. I think Bill Watts summed it up perfectly. After watching Street make the long, dramatic entrance for about 3 minutes, strutting his stuff, doing all the things that made Adrian famous, very calmly, very stoically, very rationally, Watts just goes, he's different. God, I laughed so hard. He was just totally beside himself. You knew he was biting his tongue, trying to hold back from saying something potentially derogatory. For me, it's a weird dichotomy. You know, we've been spending the last year or so with the WWF reviews talking about Goldust, the backstory that went into the gimmick. And God bless Dustin Rhodes, but even he's been very vocal about never really having enjoyed the gimmick and having a hard time trying to adapt to it. You could tell he was just uncomfortable with so much of it. The gay innuendos, the overly flamboyant personality. It just wasn't him. Adrian Street was different, though. He lived that gimmick from the onset. And he wasn't gay, mind you. Linda was his actual wife. They were happily married. And he was a legit shooter, which is probably how he managed to avoid getting ribbed or fucked around by the boys in the locker room. Because they knew Adrian could stretch half of them blindfolded. Guy was legit. He did World of Sport Wrestling in the UK, but it was such a culture shock when he made the transition to come over to work full-time in the US. I remember seeing early footage of Adrian when he was working in Memphis. Was it 81, 82 he showed up there? And it was so wild seeing that particular gimmick being done in the Deep South. Especially in front of a hostile crowd like that. It was a very risky thing to do, even back then. But like I said, Adrian was a real deal. He could go in the ring. He could work circles around pretty much anybody on the mat from a wrestling standpoint. And he wasn't a big guy. He was what? 210 pounds? Barely 6 feet, if that. I mean, fucking Linda could probably kick his ass. But again, that's why he worked so well in places like Memphis and later Midsouth when he showed up here in 84. Because he was different. Because the people were going to naturally gravitate to dislike the overtly sexual nature of the gimmick. That's where the heat came from. But also because you can tell that Adrian was trying to live the gimmick. Even by him working the people, it wasn't fake or forced like the whole Goldust character was. But his debut worked tremendously well. He got a quick win over this Terry Ellis fella. Then you had JR get in the ring afterwards to do an in-ring promo with Street. And this is just classic stuff. Adrian's talking about how he came to Midsouth to not only scope out all the best competition, he's also a student of anthropology. He's studied everything from the Dayaks to the Javaros. God, JR's face when Adrian's talking about studying anthropology. Excellent reactions. Could not have given a fuck less. No idea what this guy's talking about. But see, here's the thing. According to Adrian Street, He's been around the world. He's done his fair share of traveling. And Midsouth breeds a whole culture in and of itself. In particular, Adrian is interested in studying the effeminate cowboys. The South has a lot of those. The one thing he's noticed is that most women following these cowboys look like cows themselves. And since Adrian's going to be spending some time in the area, he figured he can help the culture out by giving them some life lessons in hygiene, beginning with soap. Believe me when I tell you, this is quite the promo. Delivered in only the way Adrian Street could deliver it. I mean, the whole premise was people in the South smell bad, they're fat, they look horrible. The cowboys look like effeminate women. That was legitimately where the heat came from. But again, it was explained in only a way that Adrian Street could describe, which is what made it fantastic. Fucking love this promo. I went back and rewatched it again after it was over. I was so entertained. Seriously, you could never do a gimmick like this in wrestling anymore. Especially as a heel. It's so tragic. Make no mistake, Adrian was a true once-in-a-lifetime man. God rest his soul. What a legend. Speaking of legends, we had Budrow Landell in action against some chump named Robert Christie. Just absolutely maimed this poor fucker in like 30 seconds. Oh, by the way, Dr. Death is still looking for challengers, in case y'all were curious. But yeah, that was pretty much it for that squash. I still liked how when Christie gave Landell an arm drag in the opening spot, Landell still had to complain to Pee Wee Anderson about hair pulling. Classic heel move. But that brought us to Brickhouse Brown versus Ernie Ladd. My very first note reads, let's see how many bumps Ernie can feasibly take in this thing. I counted approximately 3. He took 2 flat back bumps plus a back body drop from Brickhouse in the opening 15 seconds. And that was pretty much the extent of what Ernie could do physically here. It was still great, though, because Brickhouse is out there openly pitching a fit to Carl Fergie about Ernie hiding a gimmick in his trunks. And of course, Fergie does the quick pat down, but doesn't end up finding anything. Flash forward like a minute later, you see Ernie go to pull a ghost gimmick out from his trunks. I say ghost gimmick because you can clearly tell that he didn't actually have anything hidden in his trunks. Unless you count air as an illegal weapon. So he goes to load up on Brickhouse, but he ends up getting dropped again. And right as he has the pin on Ernie, it's when Buddy Landell reaches in and grabs Brickhouse by the hair to force the DQ, which ends up leading to the 2-on-1 beatdown until Sonny King runs out to make the save. And that led to the temporary battle of the two immobiles, Ernie Ladd and Sonny King. Which one was less agile and less mobile? I think Sonny barely had Ernie beat out here, but it was pretty damn close. Arnie was fighting Father Time at this point, so he was at a slight disadvantage anyway. All kidding aside, it was a fine little segment to build up the feud between Landell and Brickhouse. Not really sure about throwing Sonny King into the fray, but at least it puts him in more of a tag team role as opposed to a singles role. I'm just picturing the evident face-off between Sonny and Ernie when those two end up locking horns in the coming weeks. That'll be quite the visual. But that led to our TV main event of Krusher Kruschev versus Hacksaw Duggan. And there's actually a special stipulation to this match. It is a first ever flag versus hair match. When's the last time you saw one of those booked in wrestling? If Hacksaw wins, he gets possession of the Soviet flag. I'm not entirely sure what Duggan would want with the Soviet flag, unless it involves him wiping his ass with it. Come to find out, he took it a step further after he won. However, if Khrushchev wins, well, he gets to cut Duggan's hair on television after the match is over. So some pretty big high stakes here. I like how it took Watts less than a minute into the match to immediately start calling Khrushchev a turncoat and a commie sympathizer. It's the Cowboys' favorite term to use when describing Khrushchev. Turncoat. Traitor. So they had a match. It was kind of your formulaic big guy Midsouth matchup where, Duggan controls the pace of things for a while. He ends up missing a diving shoulder block so Khrushchev could take over and get some heat for a while. And, well, Duggan made the fiery babyface comeback. Gave Khrushchev a hell of a back body drop toward the end. Very impressive. And they do some do-si-do spots off the ropes, and Khrushchev eventually goes over with a spear tackle. Clean pinfall. At which point he grabbed the Soviet flag. He and Khrushchev had a brief tug-of-war over possession of it, which Duggan got the better of. And then Duggan ripped the flag in half. That was the entire payoff, as it turned out. There was no swerve with the Midnights running out to try to attack Duggan. No attempt at holding him down to cut off at least a portion of his hair. Nope. Just the babyface beat the heel clean and stole his flag. And Khrushchev was sad. It had all the writings of incoming swerve. And the swerve ended up being the fact that there wasn't a swerve. It was the Vince Russo philosophy of booking, where you give the people every incentive to believe there's a swerve coming. So when there actually isn't a swerve, that in and of itself becomes the swerve. How's that for fucked up psychology? But hey, at least the people got to see the Soviet flag disparaged. I'm sure that made all the Americans feel warm and fuzzy inside. And in fact, Duggan took it one step further, and he decided to use the Soviet flag to help him roast some marshmallows. Because that's a proper thing to do when you've got a spare Soviet flag hanging around. Set it ablaze and use it to roast some grub. That's exactly what Duggan did here. He said he would have considered using Krushev's boots and trunks, but the flag was more than enough. And there's a great visual to ruin your day. Duggan stealing Krushev's ring trunks to burn them in roast marshmallows. Lovely. It was a rather wacky ending to the program, but I don't know, it kind of worked in its own unique way. And I still enjoy the program at large, outside the whole soap opera session with Watts in the opening 2 minutes. I still maintain what I said earlier about airing the JYD stuff like that. Completely unnecessary tactic. I know Watts was visibly frustrated by all that, but it doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. Like, at that point, he needed to be the better man and just say, it is what it is. Let's try and move past this like professionals. But they did still have a relatively enjoyable program this week. And that's enough for me to give it a thumbs up, despite my criticisms about the cold open. And our world-class venture continues. It's been a very bizarre couple of weeks with things being taped and aired out of order. Managers being bounced around. Random heel and face turns that aren't really explained. In 2025, I think we'd call that your average week with AEW Dynamite. And there's also the tag team tournament, which we very much broke down in detail last week, mentioning the 12 teams that are a part of it, some of whom aren't even regulars in the Dallas area. The best I can say is they're trying. It's a long shot, but they are at least trying to breathe some life into this product. I mean, Lord knows things have been ice cold since the Freebirds left the area earlier in the year. Plus, you got Carry out with a foot injury. I mean, that mainly leaves Kevin as the only Von Erich to carry the entire program. Lord knows Lance or Mike were ever going to be able to fill that role. So we began this week with the Grappler versus Zulu prelim match. They are now trying to give Zulu some actual competition. Either that or they're trying to find somebody on the roster that can at least carry him to something watchable for a few minutes. Did the Grappler succeed in doing so? I would say no, not really. It was the best match we've seen the Mighty Zulu have in World Class. The problem is that the match only went 90 seconds before Zulu threw the Grappler over the top rope to disqualify himself. So while I can't say it was bad, it also wasn't anything worth discussing at great length. I don't know what the hell they're looking to gain out of the Zulu push. And nobody in the audience reacts to him. He's obviously not very capable of doing matches beyond the 5-minute mark. To me, the whole thing just seems like a waste of time. Now they've apparently got him calling out Abdullah the Butcher for Christ knows what reason. Yeah, there's a fucking banger of a match right there everybody's dying to see. The Mighty Zulu versus Abdullah. It's the battle of an immobile semi-truck versus a broken-down tank. Buy your tickets now. Here's the crazy thing, though. There actually is a backstory behind the reason Zulu wants Abdullah, but it's a completely unheard of backstory that nobody has ever been given any reason to care about. The story is, Abby apparently hurt Zulu's younger brother when he was 18 years old. Bear in mind, it's never been explained who Zulu's brother was or why we should give a flying fuck. But, okay, I'll humor them. Zulu's out for revenge on behalf of his mystery brother that we've never seen. Fine, whatever. So he tries to get this over at ringside during his promo, at which point Gary Hart interrupts and tells him that if he wants Abdullah, well, he's in the ring right now. And this caught Zulu by surprise. Apparently he never thought to look over his shoulder at any point. And you know, I don't exactly know how smartened up Zulu was, or if he just decided to go into business for himself here. But this whole brawl sequence between him and Abby was very off-kilter. Okay, first he tries to run Gary into the ring post, which Gary completely no-sells. Something tells me he did not see that coming. Then he proceeds to have a sloppy fight with Abby where you can tell that Abby really doesn't know how to feed for anything Zulu's trying to do, because everything he does looks like shit, including his punches. And then to make things even more ludicrous and more preposterous, while Zulu's beating on Abdullah, he then decides to himself, you know what I need to do right now? I need to put Abdullah in a standing bear hug. A bear hug. A stationary hold. This was the point where I just threw my hands up and said, what the hell are we doing here, guys? Are you kidding me? So Gary eventually gets in there with a coat hanger and starts to wrap it around Zulu's neck. There's a wonderful image that'll warm the cockles of everybody's heart. A black man being choked out with a coat hanger in the South. Yeah, that won't rub anybody the wrong way. I'm not even trying to say it was offensive. I mean, I understood the purpose of what they were trying to do. But you had to figure people were going to ask questions. The only thing here you need to know is that despite Zulu and Abby going at it, despite all the sympathy being drummed up on Zulu here, after nearly having the life choked out of him, the fans were still more interested in seeing Bruiser Brody, which they did not get here. You know, I said a couple weeks ago that I would prefer never having to see Abdullah and Bruiser have another match as long as I live. This was not exactly what I had in mind for Abdullah's next program. Wrestling a guy that was even less mobile than him. That was even humanly possible. Good Lord. Oh, but here's the best part. We didn't get Bruiser Brody to come out to save Zulu in the previous segment. But we did get Brody coming out in the very next segment for a squash match. I understand it's a tape show, but these are the kinds of things that smarter fans would question when trying to keep tabs on continuity. Why didn't Brody try to come out to help if he was booked to wrestle on the same show? Much less the following segment? He wrestled Perry Jackson. Mercer informed us that Bruiser would like at least one more match with Abdullah at some point. I began to sweat profusely. I said, "Fuck you, Bill Mercer," to even suggest we need to see that match again. Really wasn't much else to say about this one. Brody worked over Jackson for a few minutes and won with a big boot. And since we're on the subject of Abby still, he was all over the program this week. It was a good segue into the next match they aired between him and Kevin von Erich. I'm trying to think. Did we ever review an Abdullah versus Kevin von Erich match at the Sportatorium? I certainly don't remember talking about it. As a matter of fact, I don't ever recall seeing Abby show up at the Sportatorium until just this week. So this must have been aired as some kind of dark match or something. They announced beforehand that Abdullah was going to be patted and searched before every match, just in case he was concealing some kind of gimmick. Well, it turns out he got busted trying to hide something in his right boot. What appeared to be a giant metal rod, a signature of Abby's. So, well, if you've seen one Abdullah match in your lifetime, you've pretty much seen them all. They had another one of those crazy, out-of-control, unhinged brawls where, the fight spills out to the floor. They end up going after each other with chairs. Gets into the crowd multiple times. There was a sequence where Abby and Kevin were just kind of doing collar and elbow tie-ups over by the timekeeper's table. And I wrote here, Abby lays on top of Kevin in a collar and elbow and appears to be making out with him. Now, that's not entirely what was going on here, but it looked rather suspect. It eventually led to both guys brawling up through the crowd, wherein Gary Hart and Abby completely vanished. And then Kevin came back to the ring and yelled for Abby to come back so he could kill him. Direct quote. Again, it was sort of your standard run-of-the-mill Abdullah match. If you like wild brawls and out-of-control situations, it was definitely a match you would enjoy seeing. Kevin surprisingly got a lot more out of Abby here than I thought he would. And the crowd was obviously into everything because Kevin was involved. Again, I don't remember how long ago this was taped. It had to have been within the last month or two. For what it was, didn't really have any issues with it. Considering they've got Abdullah feuding with the mighty Zulu right now. I don't know. To me, it kind of seems like a massive downgrade for him and Gary Hart. But that led us to the TV main event of Lance Von Erich versus Matt Bourne. When I looked at the timeline here, I'm like, man, they're giving this a lot of time. I don't know if even Matt Bourne can make a 15-minute Lance Von Erich match watchable. Well, he certainly tried. I would not call this a great TV match by any stretch. But for a Lance match, it was certainly far from the worst we've ever seen. He worked over Bourne's left arm for a while. By a while, I mean about 8 minutes straight. Come to think of it, Bourne really didn't get a whole lot of offense in this match until well over halfway through, when he finally dropped Lance out of the corner with an atomic drop. There was a great spot where Bourne actually kind of fucked up the stun gun spot. Very matter of fact, Bill Mercer just goes, ugh, Terrible move for Lance. That was funny. And so Bourne got the heat for a bit until Lance got Bourne trapped in the rope so he could unload on him with punches. The fact that I have to preface that is wild. Yes, Lance blew his load on Matt Bourne. Clip that. Anyway, so Lance went up for a big splash, but Bourne got the knees up. And then as Bourne actually had the match won after hitting Lance with a seated splash, he ends up going for the cocky pin attempt, only to get caught in the backslide pin from Lance. And so the heel fucked himself, basically. I mean, the last few minutes I would say were pretty good. I nearly fell asleep watching Lance control the pace of everything in the opening 8 or 9 minutes. They said next week it's going to be Kevin and Lance teaming up to face Bourne and Sawyer. But there was never anything said about that being a tournament match. Pretty sure Kevin isn't even teaming with Lance in the tournament. I thought Lance was teaming with Brody. I don't know. You know, the absence of Mike is very telling at this point. They were giving him all this hype and fanfare for his big return earlier in the summer, and it's been virtually radio silent. Like, I know he eventually comes back, but there's obviously something going on behind the scenes that we're not being told about. Things that became a lot more crystal clear when they put out that docu-series on World Class years ago. You know, the whole mental state of Mike von Erich when he came back from that near-death illness. It was bad. You know, it really is hard to watch the Von Erichs during this time and not think about how dour things really are. I mean, they were just flying by the seat of their pants, hoping anything will stick at this point. And as a fan, it's tough because you want to watch the show and try to connect the dots to see where things are going and what the big money feud is they're building toward. Does anybody know what the money feud is right now in World Class? Chris Adams is the champion, and he's practically ice cold, both in terms of challengers and anything story-related. I think he was still in the midst of the legal battle after the pilot incident that happened a few months prior, which is why we haven't seen him on TV lately. The Rick Rude departure really threw things out of sorts because, I mean, you could tell they were clearly building to a rematch with those two at some point. Beyond just the next Star Wars. I mean, they probably wanted to carry that thing over to the Cotton Bowl event in October. I'm pretty sure they've already taped the Labor Day Star Wars by this point. So they'll probably air that on tape delay over the next couple weeks. You know, judging how the tag team tournament's been a pretty big deal, I have to imagine a lot of that card is going to be mostly tournament rounds. But the bigger picture is the Cotton Bowl. What are we, like a month out from that event? Yeah, I'm having a hard time seeing what the money program or the big match worth paying to see is. I mean, without looking it up right now, I actually don't know what the world title match would be for Texas Stadium. Who even knows if they have one planned? I don't think Chris is technically the champion by the time we get there. Didn't they end up stripping him of the belt? And it wasn't too long after that when Chris ended up leaving for the UWF anyway. 'Tis a mess. An absolute mess of a product. But what are you going to do? We just keep chugging along in the timeline, and Enjoy the decline. It's one of my favorite sayings. All right. So on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there. We do have a Retro Raw coming up on Monday, and I think the In Your House event would be the following week. Correct? Should probably look this up right now. In Yo House. 10, right? Mind Games. It actually is a cool title. September 22nd. So yeah, we'll actually have a few more weeks there. Cool. Well, on that note, we'll catch you everybody on Monday. Take care. Peace out.